So, I'm boo-hooing to myself and to my god sisters and god brothers. I wanted to be married.
Yeah.
Bottom line. And apparently, unbeknownst to me, there was a young lady in Gitanagri who's also crying on everyone, crying on everyone's shoulder, like I need a husband, blah blah blah. Well, in 2000, during initiation. Was up at Gitanagri and there was initiation and blah, blah. And it comes up again. And for whatever reason, we pursued and got in contact. And I was kind of like, I knew what she looked like and stuff, but because I was a video guy, I had video, so I actually could go back. I was like,
Oh my God.
And it was funny because she was like, I kind of knew what he looked like, but I had,
Yeah, you had the footage.
Yeah, I had the footage.
You were reviewing the footage.
So, she was dancing in kirtan. I was like, oh, okay, cool.
All right, everyone, welcome to The Sole Purpose. We're interviewing my father, but also our father, Ajamil, or Albert, as he was born. He came into this world.
Skip.
Bert. And we're just going to talk to him a little bit about how he ended up, choosing the life that he's chosen, how he ended up becoming my father, and just get into his spiritual understanding and what attracted him to the movement that he joined, the ISKCON movement. Because unlike Mom, she was born into it, whereas yours was a choice made from coming out from completely outside. Of course, it's always a choice. At some point you could leave, but
Right.
The choice was to come into it. So we can get into that a little bit. And but to start with, maybe if you want to just tell us a little bit about like your childhood, just give us like a quick 5 to 10 minute synopsis of you. Okay. And then we'll get into the more spiritual. I mean, spiritual can be part of it, but just so people know where you're coming from, what your background is.
Pretty much, I grew up in Pittsburgh, in the early '60s and '70s. I was born in '61. I'm 60 right now, and my parents, my mom's family came from Mississippi. They were part of the Great Migration from field to from the factory fields to factory. Basically, there was a big migration in the earlier part of the 20th century.
Were you talking about the farming to industry?
Yeah, farming to industry. Because there were a lot of black folks that migrated to the big cities at that point.
To do the factory.
And my grandmother, she migrated from Mississippi. Okay. And usually those routes traveled the train routes. So I have family in Chicago, family in Pittsburgh, and along that way. So we had a big portion there. So my mom was a result of that, and they were actually sharecroppers, picking cotton back in that time. My father's father family were from rural Pennsylvania and came to Pittsburgh. So you always had that rural thing coming to the city. And so in Pittsburgh, I guess growing up in the 60s with the big industry and the steel factories and what have you, it was actually a fairly prosperous for non-skilled labor, people working in the mills and what have you. But it was still very difficult for African Americans to progress. But I grew up in Penn Hills, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh. I lived in Pittsburgh a little bit, and it's right outside of the Pittsburgh area. Okay. My family, both my father's family and my mother's family, went to the same church, Rodman Street Baptist Church. So I was raised like Baptist, and very much on my mother's side, very matriarchal in our family. The women were very strong women. My grandmother was very adamant about, her faith in Christ. She was very much involved in missionary work and involved the family. So our life revolved around those things, and also revolved very much around education. She lacked education, but she saw to it that all of her children were educated, and so that they could progress.
Right.
And even at one point in time, my grandmother did day work. That was like work where you go and you work in somebody's house and you clean their house. She also worked for the school board. And time going, forward, my aunt, my mother's older sister, got her degree in education, worked in the educational system, and actually became the director of personnel in the city of Pittsburgh. And my grandmother was cleaning her office. So my grandmother was very proud of my aunts and siblings, because they exceeded well and did well in education. My mother was a teacher, social studies. My father was a mailman, but he was a musician, but he was a mailman for several years. And
what was his favorite instrument?
Oh, he played upright bass.
Okay.
So he played not only a little bit of jazz, he played classical music, was instrumental in starting one of the first African-American symphonies in Pittsburgh.
Oh, wow. Nice.
So, this was happening in the 60s, a lot of change, a lot of things were, unrest, but people were trying to better themselves, So that was kind of my growing up. I was a bit of a jock as a kid, played football, did track, did that whole thing. And most of my family was living right there in Pittsburgh. So I had aunts and uncles. I was the oldest kid, but I had a lot of cousins that came after me.
Yeah.
But I guess I had influential in my life was my dad. I had my Uncle Bob, who was my mom's sister's husband, and I had Uncle Earl.
Okay.
And so those were the three main male figures in my life in terms of raising me. And as a result of my father's relationship with my uncle, who was actually, now getting all this family stuff, but was actually my mother's first cousin, but she was raised, he and her were raised as like brother and sister.
Gotcha.
But as a result of their relationship, they talked philosophy, and we're talking like into the 70s, as we moved from the 60s into the 70s, mid 70s, there was a lot of exploration into coming off of the 60s, exploration into consciousness, into philosophy. How did Black people want to situate themselves, not only as, civil rights movement, what have you, but also philosophically where people were in terms of religion, philosophy, whatever. But they would discuss this stuff. So I was trying to figure out exactly what date it was, but I believe it was 75 or 76. My uncle comes home with a set of Srimad Bhagavatams and gives them to my father.
Wow.
So,
which uncle is this, Bob?
Uncle Earl. Uncle Earl. And so I was just like, all right, I got a set of Srimad Bhagavatam sitting up there, and you peek through your parents' books and you're checking out what's going on, and
cliffhanger. Wait a minute. Come on.
As a result of getting these books, I would check them out, and back in that time,
How old were you at this time?
I was in high school.
Oh, okay.
I was in high school. I hadn't graduated. I graduated in 78.
Okay.
So this was before I
Like
graduated.
sophomore, maybe.
Yeah. And I was just like, God, I wish I would have, actually had those dates down, but, approximately. And I ended up taking the first 3 books with me to college.
Oh, okay.
And it was just one of those things, the blue people, and I was reading about Krishna. I was like, whoa, this is just like too much. But, people were exploring different things at that time.
Did your dad read them, or he just kind of had them on the
I'll get to that in a second.
was wondering why you stole his first 3 books.
Well, I stole. Well, he read. He read them, but it was fun. Well, I will jump a little bit.
Yeah.
Apparently, he was very familiar with the Hare Krishna movement to the extent that later in life, when I actually was involved, he was like, he had read Monkey on a Stick. He was understanding. I don't live that. Pittsburgh is not that far from New Vrindavan. Okay. So people knew what was going down with some of those, or people had some ideas what was going down. So he was a little nervous about the fact that I was involved with that. But, he accepted it, and, we had talked about some of those issues. And I'm like, yes, those things did happen. You can't deny those things that were going on, but also you have to also deal with the philosophy as well, and what does it have to offer? All the teachings.
Just because the people are doing bad things doesn't mean that the philosophy is bad.
There's been lots of
people.
There's been every religion.
At any religion.
And you can go that, and you can point that, but you also have to see, how are you taking this? How are you?
Right. People just don't twist a good thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I took these books to college with me and had them with me, and of course I was exploring various states of consciousness, and that's
one how you always put it.
Well, at that time, people off in the 60s and in the 70s, people were exploring things.
Yeah.
But being the jock that I was, it was very interesting. I had gotten to a point physically where I was fairly good shape, and I kind of discovered that beyond stretching, there was more. So I kind of discovered yoga at the same time all those things are happening. And I got into that. I got into the whole hatha yoga thing, and ideals of vegetarianism. Although when I was first exposed to vegetarianism in high school, I told my family, I'm done. I'm not doing any, I tried it for a while. Couldn't do it because the environment was just not conducive. Go to college, exploring these things, get out of college. I ended up in DC area. First group of people that I lived with, I was living in a group apartment, students who were going to George Washington University at the time. They were vegetarian. They were vegetarian on the ethical kind of side. I was like, I'm right there with you. We ate a lot of cheese sandwiches and what have you. But, it was like, I hooked up with people that were having that same mindset of me, of like, there's more to it than just this, than a society where we utilize animals for, our sustenance and stuff.
Yeah.
So those were some of the things that, I was exploring, and I know I'm kind of going all over the place, but, one of the things in regards to church, I went to church as a young man, regularly participated in a couple of summer seminars that we went to, different things that we're dealing with, what do I want to say? They were dealing with reach out to people when you do programs in Africa, and I'm the words eluding me right now, but
was it the Peace Corps?
No, but when you're reaching out, it was a reach out. Forget that. We can edit that. Because Grandma was involved with a lot missionary work. Missionary work. So that was a big emphasis in my family.
Helping others.
Helping others. That kind of mindset.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my thing in Pittsburgh. I went to school outside of Pittsburgh in a small college called Juniata College, which isn't actually far from where I'm living in Gitanagri now. Yeah. But I ended up graduating from IUP, and I did studies in communications. And basically I got into photography, videography, and radio. And I was lucky enough, after college, I went to DC, and I was lucky enough to get into educational television. So I worked in primarily universities, doing not only courses online, on cable television. I worked for one university that were broadcasting to what they called them, to various corporate entities that were located around DC. They were taking classes at various satellite locations. So this was using microwave technology. It was kind of before the internet, of course.
Right.
And so there were different ways that they were doing hybrid teaching and seminars to people who were already working.
Gotcha.
So my interest in regards to getting into like television and video production was always from a point of view. I didn't want to go into it and just be like, oh, I'm a news guy, because a lot of guys went into news.
Yeah.
And my intent was to do something meaningful, so I wanted to be in educational type stuff. So that's why I was doing, working at universities and colleges, and ended up working for a college in Maryland, which I was there for about 17 years or so, as a producer director, and we produced cable access programs.
What was the name of that?
Montgomery College?
Montgomery?
Montgomery College in Rockville. I was at the Rockville campus. So there we produced programs about the community, and basically I was given carte blanche to do whatever I wanted. Because we were trying to fill up airtime for a cable access channel. We also had educational programs that were playing on the channel, but basically any types of programs that I wanted to do. So I initially did a program called From the Drum. It was my little project, and basically it was dealing with issues and concerns of the African American community, and I utilized the drum as a concept for broadcasting information, which is actually interesting because within Krishna consciousness we deal with the aspect of mridanga as broadcasting, the news. So in this time after I got to DC, I had some experience. I had one experience in college that was very interesting. Came back home, I guess my sophomore year, hanging out with friends, and one of the guys said, I've been hanging out, I've been associating with the devotees, and they're really cool. I was like, what? Because I had some understanding about Hare Krishna, but I didn't understand the culture or anything. So a bunch of guys in my community, like 5 or 6 guys, we crashed the Sunday feast. So it's like, dude, they have a great Sunday feast.
Dude, it's free food and it's the best food.
I mean, oh my God, and it's like, so I had a chance. My first prasadam was strawberry sweet rice.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't know it was prasadam then, but later on, after I recollect and was getting it. So anyway, when I was in college, I did a paper in one of my classes on it was about deviant cultures. I did something on the Hare Krishnas. I utilized. So I actually came back and went to the temple again to do this to enter.
So sneaky.
Oh my God!
Yeah, he's like the master angler.
I mean, when you look at it, when I look at it in the past, it's like, wow, all these things kind of led me to having various understandings or various experiences.
Sure.
So I'm in DC. Of course, I have this inkling for yoga, and there were several cool bookstores. But in DC, there were often on the weekends, people would put out their tables selling stuff and what have you.
Yeah.
And I actually ended up picking up some of Srila Prabhupada's books then. And one of the first books I picked up was Hare Krishna Explosion. I think that was Hayagriva that did that. And the second one that I got was Easy Journey to Other Planets.
That's one of the
because it was like, yo, man, it's like, the topic matter attracted me.
Of course. I mean,
and
and
then you get into it.
States of consciousness, that's like a natural first stepping stone.
So I read that and, of course, was blown away with the fact of having to that it's a life process of trajecting oneself to, another planet.
Yeah.
But I also, during my years of college and exploration, I ran across this particular Hill's theory of consciousness, and they were dealing with topics of
Is that what it's called? Hill's theory?
Hill's theory of consciousness. I actually looked it up a couple years ago, and but I had gotten turned on to this ideal of community, the ideal of being a part of a community, and utilizing consciousness as a center for community. There was an old hippie book, 21st century consciousness in the higher consciousness in the 21st century. I can't remember the name of the book. I have it, but it was a book that had gathered along the way, and they dealt with different aspects of yoga, Raja, Jnana, Bhakti, mentioned a little Bhakti, but it also was dealing with vegetarianism, dealing with growing sprouts. I had gotten into trying to help different types of healthy paradigm things. So I was growing my own sprouts, doing some yoga things, and just trying to explore consciousness from a different way. And I'm so anyway, with the Hill's theory of consciousness, dealing with community, that was always something a part of what I felt like we need to be living together, doing things in a way that we could explore things as a community to grow. The basis is a community.
It seems that based on your upbringing, and I know, community is very front and center in African American culture. So it's almost like, it seems that your grandma was very keen on creating that sort of atmosphere in your family. So it seems like the natural kind of culmination of that experience growing up.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting you point that out. I was just thinking about how we operate in my home. Like my grandmother's home, and anybody who knew my grandmother knows my grandmother. If you needed a place to live, you stayed at, my grandmother. My grandmother's name was Barbara Bush as well. She, it was kind of funny. At one point, as part of one of the missionary groups, she was a president of President Barbara Bush. And at the time, the Bushes were in office, and it was like, and I was saying, yeah, well, my grandmother was Barbara Bush, and I was like, come on, dude. I'm like, explain the whole thing, but it was a little funny aside. She traveled out of the country one time, and it was to Seoul, Korea, for a World Baptist convention, and it was one of the highlights. I remember us all helping her with what she was trying to do at the time.
That's cool.
But the idea of community and with our family, what we've always tried to do is open ourselves up to people who needed a place, friends. It's hard, but you want to open yourself up to to be that kind of individual. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm talking about. Do any other questions?
So while you were working there at Montgomery College, is that when, how, I guess, so you've at this point picked up a couple books, and now,
how
did you really, when did you take the plunge to I'm joining? What really took you there, and then how did that lead to Bhakti Tirtha Swami?
As a result of my, I guess, dealing with some of these issues, I began also within DC at that time. There was an emphasis on African culture, dealing with how African culture played a part in the world, and there were many writers, and there were a lot of seminars, and there was a culture, Afrocentric culture that was formulating in DC. Yeah. So you had a lot of African thinkers who were really looking at this issue and not being bypassed in terms of from a historical perspective and all these things. So I started reading individuals like Sheikh Anta Diop and there was Tony Browder, and there were other individuals who were coming out with such wonderful information about African culture in the ancient world. You know, how we were connected, you know, how African people were connected to this world. So, of course, going to different organizations, seeing what was going on, and there was a crossover. There was a crossover of vegetarian ideas. There was a crossover of spiritual ideas. So, of course, you had things of the Nation of Islam. You know, you had Muslim folks that were exploring culture from that. You had people who were going back to more African ideas. You know, so you had all of those things converging. You know, you had, of course, you have Howard University, who is one of the main historically black universities in America. Things were happening there. You know, it was a center of much exploration. You had things like Kathy Hughes had Radio One, which was a radio show focusing on those issues. So in my dealings, of course, I'm up in Montgomery, you know, College, and we're doing our things there. I'm trying to do some different programs, doing programs.
This is now, we're talking like late 80s, early 90s?
Late 80s, early 90s.
Okay.
Late 80s, early 90s. Good, very good.
Yeah.
And doing things at various museums, looking at African culture from so many different ways. We did a thing back in the day at that station on Matthew Henson, who was from St. Mary's County, which is Southern Maryland. So went out to Southern Maryland, met a guy who knew Matthew Henson, and he had all these African artifacts. So I was just like meeting people, you know, doing this, that, and the other. And it was great. You know, I could explore things about my culture, but also, you know, I could show these things to other people. I could share that.
Yeah.
So my desire at this point, and I've not really talked about this in a way, so it may seem kind of weird, but I'm sitting there at my desk at Montgomery College, and I'm like, you know, I want to do something valuable in this life. My whole idea of being an educational was to be able to share. You know, I come from a family and they were like, you need to get a job at, you know, the school system or whatever, but I was doing it my way, you know, from my perspective. And I'm sitting there and I said, you know, I asked the creator, I need something that I can put my teeth into. You know, so I want that story that I can tell, you know. But more than important than that, I was seeking a teacher. And I put all these parameters around it, you know, because at the time I had a teacher who was doing yoga, a white-bodied female, you know. And I was like, you know, I loved the fact, you know, I was learning this yoga, but I was like, I don't know if I can handle her from a teaching perspective, you know. So I'm setting all these parameters up. I'm asking God about this kind of teacher I want.
I want a teacher, but I want a teacher I want.
You know, and you know, so, you know, I asked for that, and I did my meditation, what have you. And I initially, when I was, you know, this was my meditation. I ended up hooking up with this wonderful gentleman, and I was doing yoga, but it was called Egyptian yoga. So we were doing Egyptian postures and what have you. And he was teaching me that the Egyptians were also into yoga, breathing meditations and all that sort of stuff. And one of the guys who ended up, we befriended one another, and I didn't know this at the time, but he was a Prabhupada disciple, a Papa Stai. So we're hanging out together and what have you, and we're doing different things. And as a result, I'm doing videos and I'm mixing with a lot of different satsangs, you know, or different groups that were meeting, you know, chanting, Shivites, you know, Guru Ma, you know, all these different devotees, some Sufis, you know, hanging out with Africans and dealing with different types of chanting, Shango, you know, all these kind of things, you know, just exploring this. And my first mentor I was like, we would sit down. He says, well, what do you want to do? And I would always say, Harry, let's do Hare Krishna. Because I was attached to that.
Yeah.
Well, come to it, a god sister comes, or not god sister at the time. I meet these devotees and they're like, we're doing this project. And, can you come and videotape it? Great, I'll come and do this. Let me go back a little bit. In the books that I were picking up at tables along the way, I had gotten this one magazine, Back to Godhead. I would see it, I was like, oh, I grab it. There's one Back to Godhead I picked up, and I opened it up, and it was the 2 Lives of John Favors. And this was, okay, I'll put this away. He was a Princeton graduate. He was an activist like myself.
Yeah.
Well, not myself, but I was interested in activism. So I see this individual who's, into Black activism, but then also he's a Hare Krishna monk. I mean, it was like, okay, I just put that away and what have you.
I need to give that some attention later on.
Yeah. So it's part of my little repertoire.
Yeah.
Come doing this video for this group. Now, I had started going to this Institute for Applied Spiritual Technology, and I had been going there maybe a couple months before this project had happened. And it's time for the event. And who comes out or is the director? Now, I had this suspicion that this was the same person, but I wasn't completely making the connection. And I saw this individual who was just like a king.
Yeah.
He came in royally, and I was like, wow. The name of the program was Jiva's Journey. And it was written by one of my god sisters, Yashoda Mensa, and was put on in DC. So that was my introduction to
we're gonna have to interview her now.
to Bhakti.
Jiva's Journey. Jiva means soul.
Jiva means soul.
Like,
The Jiva, Jiva soul.
Word for
Right,
soul.
right.
Yeah.
It's the journey of all of us,
Right.
basically. We're all
soul
traveling
journey.
in this realm.
So it was
After-
like a play.
It was a
type
play
thing?
that was done. It was a play.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it was they had it in a facility. There was light. There was live music. It was a play. I mean, whole shebang. And we're putting out this out to the community. Well, I'm the video guy because that's what I do. And I was like, wow. So the next thing you know it, I'm totally involved in this process, and I'm like, oh my God, I surrender and I'm doing service. Next thing you know it, I'm in the Institute. To the chagrin of the other project that I had been involved in, it was just like, but I don't know. It was a heart-wrenching thing because I had learned so much from this other individual. But obviously I was...
Krishna comes knocking.
Krishna comes
you gonna
knocking.
do?
Yeah, it was one of those. So I find myself in the Institute and, under the tutelage of Bhakti Tirtha Swami. And those were in the early 90s.
And that was John Favors.
That was John Favors. And, make the connection, and it was just like, wow, And the Institute was like, we called it Institute, we just called it Institute, was like a hot box of ideas, people coming from so many varied backgrounds, to the extent that you could be in that room and there was a Afrocentric Black nationalist, sitting there and there were punkers in there, but their attraction was to Bhakti Tirtha Swami, to the spiritual message, and it wasn't a body designation at that point, To the extent when I was working at Montgomery College, some of the people circles I was working in, and helping and doing programs for the air. So this one ladies that I were working with were working on they wanted to build a science exhibit. They were big around the country. They were doing different things. Well, I ended up shooting a thing for Bhakti Tirtha Swami, and this group had asked him to do it for him. So I come into this thing, and I'm like seeing these older, white ladies who were, of course, very nice, but it was just a whole nother group of people who were accepting this technology, and it wasn't based on like a particular body type. It was based on this information that Bhakti Tirtha had to share. So his appeal was wide and broad, you know, to so many different people. Although my connection was coming from my perspective of this, and then he drops the bomb, and it's like it's not about this body.
About black activism.
It's never been. It never. It wasn't. It was about the
about-
spirit soul. It was
Yeah.
about the soul that we are. We have these bodies, just like we have clothes that we wear for a while. But to identify with those particular things is
It's foolish.
it's
ultimately.
cool. It is.
Yeah.
It is.
It's all temporary.
So as he is growing and educating people through this time,
Yeah.
my first marriage had failed. I still had some children, and
Now, how did that play into? Were you married before you joined the institute?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, and it just we were in different places.
Yeah.
Although my first wife did go to New Vrindavan and checked it out, and she was open to a lot of different things. It wasn't, excuse me, it wasn't. Just some things aren't meant to be.
Yeah.
And we just grew.
What did you find the biggest challenge to be with when you joined? Like, what was the biggest? Was there a big challenge, or was it just super easy? What was the?
I guess the challenge was, dropping some of my identifications, broadening my perspective in regards to who I was, but also maintaining those things because not to diminish those things, because being in this body it gives us our perspectives, but I don't have to be not being attached to it as
Yeah.
Using your perspective to try to help other people from the things you've learned. Yeah.
Yeah, and the same thing with the programs that I was putting on in terms of From the Drum, which was an initial program, but then I was working with some other folks. We worked on a program called Have You Heard? And that program was with Dr. Percy Thomas. He was exploring things in the community of Montgomery County at that point, but we also were able to bring in Bhakti Tirtha Swami and expose.
He interviewed him on TV, right?
Yes.
I watched that.
Yeah,
a couple times.
we had several interviews with him.
Yeah,
and that's
those were really powerful.
Yeah, and it's just like being able to share these things, and of course, Bhakti Tirtha Swami was very eclectic in his approach. He utilized so many things, in the material world, people like to look good. You know what I'm saying? They, you do your hair a certain way, you do how you dress, and he utilized so much of that. He was also preaching in Africa, and there were a lot of things that he was doing in Nigeria, Ghana, and so he was also. I think you already know he was also, but he was also a African
tribal
chief.
Yeah.
As a result of his work with chiefs, he was elevated to that point of a chief, and that's like, it's a whole other thing. That one of the things I'd like to explore more about his African connection, in regards to
the fact that he was able to meet with so many of these different tribal leaders and help them come together and settle petty differences and things.
Yeah.
And I even as a kid, I noticed for sure he had a very royal.
He also
Like,
met a lot of non-tribal leaders.
Yeah.
He's met all
No,
leaders of all
of
kinds.
course.
Yeah, yeah.
Nelson Mandela,
Yeah.
actually, there's a speech that I watched of his recently where he was warming up the crowd for him. That was
yeah.
But he recognized that people are going to be drawn to that, and that's it's like Prabhupada says, the pill, candy coating the pill. It doesn't matter what you put on it as long as it gets down the throat.
Yeah.
So he was very powerful when it came to using psychoanalysis and things to present the philosophy in a way that appealed to the fundamental human psyche urges that we all have. Yeah. He was.
But as well, there was, so much that he shared with us when he was coming back from going not only to Africa, but to Europe and and Russia and Croatia and so many different countries, and to have a family like that. Like I have god brothers that are across the board, Croatian, Russian, from South Africa, some Indian, African, that all come together in this family of trying to come into God's culture, and expanding their consciousness, and we do this through this process of bhakti that we've been given from Bhakti Tirtha Swami, and the reservoir of bhakti, but through bhakti, through Srila Prabhupada's movement, that and I don't think I ever heard Bhakti Tirtha. I never heard Bhakti Tirtha speak without mentioning Prabhupada. Never. Yeah. I mean, it was Prabhupada was here all the time. It was right
sitting next
there,
to him
the whole, regardless of whatever environment he was in. He brought him. Prabhupada was with him.
Laid the credit at his feet.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that Prabhupada expounds on in his teachings is a bona fide spiritual master will never take credit for anything that they say or do. They always give the credit to the acharyas that come before. Prabhupada did the same thing to his spiritual master, Bhakti Tirtha Swami. Many swamis throughout ISKCON, they do so much and they don't take credit for it, or they redirect the credit to him, which is an important thing, because otherwise the human ego can really, and I think that's one of the things where, many spiritual leaders throughout all cultures succumb to that if they're not careful. When you have this, you have power over these people, they're looking up to you in a very vulnerable way spiritually, they're seeking, they're in pain, they're like, that's a huge responsibility to take, for someone to come to you like that and surrender themselves fully. If you abuse that, that's horrible.
And it's like to surrender oneself to a particular process, or to and when one surrenders oneself to this process of bhakti, for some it's immediate, and others it's more gradual. How are we doing?
Good. It's 110.
So.
Oh yeah.
A question about. We can maybe circle back up on some more Bhakti Tirtha Swami things specifically, but I also wanted to know how you went from DC to Gitanagari, like how that transition went. Gitanagari is where I grew up, in Pennsylvania, in the middle of nowhere. And Bhakti Tirtha Swami also moved there, so I'm sure that's maybe part of it. But if you wanted to maybe just tell a little bit of that story.
So we're all in DC at the Institute, various locations where it was held. And I guess in the late 90s, Gitanagari was having some issues with manpower and just needed help.
The farming community.
The farming community. Yeah. And they asked Bhakti Tirtha to come and see what he can do. So I had some god brothers and sisters that actually physically moved to Gitanagari and was helping out with the project. Some of the early ones, Bali and Vrajalila, Ekavera, Mother Jagannath, Chintamani.
I went to school with her son when I was like 4 or 5 years old.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
And Mother Yashoda.
Okay.
And I don't think I'm name. Oh, and Sadachar.
Oh, okay.
Sadachar and Chita had. So you had a group up there. We still had the institute in DC area, but whenever seminars, you know how when seminars or festivals, we traveled everywhere. Go to Gitanagari. So I had been to Gitanagari several times before.
Yeah.
And at that time I was living in Baltimore, and I wasn't in a relationship. My two boys were being raised by their mother in another location. I believe they were in Indiana at one point, and down in Atlanta. So I'm boo-hooing to myself and to my god sisters and god brothers. I wanted to be married.
Yeah.
Bottom line. And I had a decent job. I was working at like Montgomery College. Had been there for a while. And apparently, unbeknownst to me, there was a young lady in Gitanagri who was also crying on everyone, crying on everyone's shoulder, like, I need a husband, blah, blah, blah. And actually, 1 year before we actually got together, the same thing was there. And it was like, no, didn't pursue it. Well, in 2000, during initiation, I was up at Gitanagri, and there was initiation and blah, blah, and it comes up again. And for whatever reason, we pursued, and we got in contact. And I was kind of like, I knew what she looked like and stuff, but because I was a video guy, I had video, so I actually could go back. I was like, and it was funny because she was like, I kind of knew what he looked like, but I had,
Yeah, you had the footage.
Yeah, I had the footage.
Reviewing the footage.
So, she was dancing in Kirtan. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And so we ended up talking. We were trying to text, or we were
emailing.
We were emailing.
Yeah.
And her writing was not that fast, and mine was a little faster. And I'm like, look, let's not do this email thing. This is taking too long. And that weekend, for a couple days, we talked like literally the first night 7 or 8 hours. The next night we talked, for another 10 hours or whatever. And she's like, okay, stop. Let's ask if this is okay, let's see if, permission. So we talked to Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj and asked if he think this would be a good idea.
Yeah.
And he says, yeah, okay. Because you want the blessings from the elders. If he would have said no, your mom would have been like, nah, this ain't happening.
So it was a match made in heaven.
Yeah. I think that she had surrendered to him to that extent because she really wanted someone to help her with that, because you can end up with a lot of weirdos, and she just wants to make sure or even not a weirdo, could be a great person, but maybe that's not compatible.
Right. Yeah.
We
Exactly.
for a couple months, like, actually this don't work, because she didn't want to do that no more. She didn't want to go back in and out of anything else. She's like, I want Bhakti to always say this is a good match.
Right.
Hey, that's smart, man.
So our first date was that next weekend, and we met at the barn, and we milked a cow.
Oh,
so and that was my first time. Yeah. And that's how it started. And so that's how I ended up. Well, that's not how I ended up. There's a little bit more to that.
Because you were still living.
Yeah, I was still living in Baltimore, D.C. And okay, we're in this relationship, and I'm thinking like, wow, I can have you guys just come on and move down here with me, and so on and so forth. Well, that wasn't the case.
Christian ain't gonna let her leave Gitanagri.
I had been working in a job, and I don't know if I want to put this all on tape, but I'll tell the gist of the gist of the story is I had been working in a job for 17 years. An incident happened, and I lost my job.
Oof.
First, I was put on probation, and then I ended up losing my job. So here I am, found this wonderful person. I don't have a job anymore. I have a house in Baltimore. She lives in Gitanagri, and she's like, forget about the house. Just come on up here. So I ended up moving to Gitanagri, and we were married, and thus started my time in Gitanagri. And had I not lost my job, I would have stayed in Baltimore. So things happen for a reason. We don't always know why things happen, and they precipitate new things. So if we have faith, and if we surrender ourselves,
Yeah.
to that, and you got to look, and sometimes we only see that in hindsight, but we can see that in foresight if we understand.
When we surrender.
Yeah. When we surrender,
Yeah.
surrender to that. So I ended up.
I wrote a little note here. So the theme, your family upbringing, it's like the rural coming to the city, and now you've gone from the city back to the rural.
Back
made
to the
full circle, but how do you think? Were you ever able to kind of? How did your grandma take it? Was she?
They like. I didn't know. We never had a discussion about that.
How do you think she'd feel now, knowing?
I think she'd be happy.
If she could see through all the.
I think she'd be happy
I think
about
she
it. Because the thing is, it's like what I moved into was a much simpler environment. Although it was very difficult, I had 2 new stepsons. That I was dealing with. Nitai was 9 at the time.
Was I 9?
You were not. You were about 9.
Okay.
And and so there was. How shall I say? Krishna started my embarkment on my own growth. Because when you come into a situation, if I could do it again, I would change some of those things. But I also learned a lot. I grew a lot. And it was a challenge. I think that was one of my biggest challenges. And coming to terms with and shifting my way of thinking.
Yeah.
I had a particular way that I thought it should be. And that was the way it, and
yeah, but the problem was so did I.
And so that created a whole dynamic, and it started us off, and we had some rocky times and dealing with things and
something that I always respected at some point. I don't remember how I was older. I think I was already like mid-teens when we had this conversation. But you did sit me down one day. I don't remember what. I think I had gotten in some argument with you and maybe also my mom about something, God knows what. And you were sitting down talking to me about like life, and you were just like, "Look, you're not gonna agree with me about your mom and everything, and we may sometimes be wrong on stuff." He's like, "At the end of the day, you got to do what you think is best for you, but you're living here." You got to try to be like respectful, try to make sure that you're not, we are providing things for you, try to keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, we aren't going to be able to force you to think the way we think. Like you're going to have to, and he's like, and you're just going to have to do it. Like you have to follow what you think, even if me and mom don't agree with you and yell at you about it. Like you basically were telling me, stand up for yourself, even if I'm yelling at you.
Yeah.
And it was that stayed with me even when we'd have altercations later, and I would just be like, well, this is what I think. So because you had basically given me permission to just think what you think. Like you gotta stand up for yourself. He's like, but try to be conscientious of what's going on around you. Try to take it into consideration, take other people's opinions, but don't let anybody control you, including me.
Yeah.
And I felt that was a very powerful conversation for you to tell me that and it was when we weren't in the midst of it, it was after.
Right.
Hey, but I appreciated it, and it stuck with me when we'd have arguments that you knew that even if you were mad at me in that moment, that some part of you respected that I needed to make my own stuff, even if I was wrong sometimes about it.
Yeah. I think that's important. That's so important. I tell you, even with Abai was very headstrong about what he wanted, and I'd have made it more worse. And so I had to step back a little bit, for him to do what he had to do, and have the experiences that he needed to have. And obviously, we needed to have that experience for our own particular growth because
to bring you where you are right now.
And this guy, man, he was such a knucklehead and stuff. But it was, and it was fun and not because I think I could talk to you guys, and I would talk to you guys and we would have.
I told your mom yesterday that we were knuckleheads, but that's because we actually felt comfortable. That's the way I would be around my own mom and dad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I wouldn't necessarily be like that with everybody.
Some
so it's
people,
the kids, when they feel welcomed and accepted. Yeah. It's
And I could fuss at you guys as much as I
Yeah.
fuss at
I
anybody
never
else.
took
And
it
like,
personally. Maybe in the moment I'm like, God, Ajmel's such a bum. And I'm like, I think the same thing about my dad. And
Yeah,
then,
exactly.
but then you take us out and like do cool stuff with us, and
Yeah.
you know, or you know,
Yeah, you had a relationship
Yeah.
with us
Yeah.
beyond just the putting us in our place sometimes or whatever our altercations were about. But I think like the same thing like with your dad.
yeah. He'd
Both of
yell-
our dads would yell at us equally.
These guys, we'd yell at him, Dad, chill out. Then we'd go over and do chores at your house. Hachi was yelling at us, like, bro, what the hell? But no, it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we always felt like safe and welcome to come over. And I never knocked. I just come.
Yeah, we just had two
like,
homes
What's
basically. Is what it felt like. We just went over there and just like walked in the house. Like it was just.
And that's how community really should be. Bhakti Tirthaswamy in one of the Music of the Heart programs was saying that, you know, that you should feel like you could go into any house if I have a problem and say something. Or all of our children should feel that way.
Yeah.
You know, because that's the way community should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not based on a superficial thing because you're an older person. You need to establish a relationship with each individual, you know, and that way we can grow and we can have those things, whether it be the uncle, the brother, older brother, or, you know, auntie, or however we do those things. Have those, and those relationships change as people get older and do things. And I'm seeing the rewards of that with the relationships I have now with so many of the young people who used to live in Gitanagari, and it doesn't have to be a lot, you know. It doesn't have to be, you know. So Gitanagari, you know, wonderful place. It kind of reminds me, and I don't know if you guys know this movie Brigadoon.
Oh yeah.
You know, which was one of my. I'm an old corny movies, you know, but you know, once a year, Brigadoon will manifest.
It wasn't once a year. It was
like
once every like 15 or 20
years, right?
Yeah.
One day, and all of the
This town would
village,
just like appear.
it would
out
appear.
Of the mist
and then you know, and it was just like, you know,
What is it, like a little like Garden of Eden?
Yeah.
exactly. It was this wonderful community,
Oh,
you know,
okay.
But then they would disappear into the mist, and for them it would be a year, but for the outside world it's like 20 years.
20 years.
And of course there was like the couple that one of them had to leave, and you know it's gonna be 20 years by the time they saw the other person. It was like, you know, that there's that tension there.
I'm gonna
But
watch it.
it was a cool
Yeah.
movie. I watched it when I was little. Maybe you're the reason I watched that. I always wondered where I watched that. Like, and I liked that movie a lot.
But Gitanagari is kind of that, in my mind, has always been that magical place. And people who have been to festivals there and have been there for a while, and especially at an earlier time, you know, we all have those things, those places, but we can bring that mood and that mindset with us all the time. And then the community is manifested, you know, in that way.
Yeah, treat each other like we're one big family as opposed to like we're on opposite sides, or you know.
Even if you're going to disagree, that's okay. But you know,
I actually was thinking, or the other day I was talking to my dad about, you know, like right now, you know, the whole pandemic, we're going through, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement is really, you know, gaining traction. We're making political headway in that area, you know, and it's interesting because like I was reading Chaitanya Charitamrita the other day, and like the part where you know, Lord Chaitanya goes to Chand Kazi's place, and it's just really interesting because like Prabhupada came here, and I didn't really start to think from this point of view until after I had been in the military and I started to understand like tactics and things like this, and like Prabhupada came here with the mission to spread Krishna consciousness, God consciousness, all over the world.
Yeah.
And all of the different things that he, you know, would use to drag people in, the food, the culture, the, you know, kirtan, or like the books, it's all meant to bring people together. And in Ayendra Prabhu, he's, you know, very passionate on this point where he says, those are all meant to bring people together so that we can chant Hare Krishna in the temple.
Yeah.
That's like the culmination. That at that point we're all, when you get into an ecstatic kirtan, it's like you're just on another level. And then, but like Lord Chaitanya in this, they're having their Harinam, and the local Muslim population and some of the Smarta Brahmanas are like, kind of like Jesus. They don't like him. They go to the Muslim ruler and, these guys are, whatever. They try to get him in trouble. And so Chand Kazi says, you got to stop. Otherwise, we're basically going to crack down on your movement.
Yeah.
And Lord Chaitanya, and this is the mood of the Sankirtan movement that Prabhupada tried to bring here. Not tried, he did. Of activism. Lord Chaitanya used congregational chanting as protest. He gathered thousands of people in the streets, and they marched on the Muslim ruler's house for the district, surrounded it, carrying torches, and here he's thinking, God, this mob's coming at me, but instead of burning and looting and doing, it was loud, noisy, intense, but it was kirtan. They weren't hurting anybody. They weren't destroying anything. It was peaceful protest at its finest because it worked. And he kind of, caved. And I find it interesting that, we're seeing this rise in, rightfully so, of course, 100%. But I just feel that if there was a way that we could, the enthusiasm and the anger that's there, again, rightfully so, for a lot of the atrocities and that have gone on for far too long, but like there has to be a way, and I think this was Prabhupada's goal was utilize it as a weapon almost for the ultimate peaceful demonstration. And I just think all of his disciples, Bhakti Tirtha Swami, Radhanath Swami, Hridayananda Swami, they're all in their own way trying to achieve that. And so in whatever way that we can try to help promote that because that is, you're saying Bhakti Tirtha Swami did it. He brought all these people in to do what? Kirtan, ultimately.
Right.
This,
and
so we need to spread that.
And we have to spread the ideal of service to one another. Yeah. The ideal of bhakti.
Yeah.
Because honestly, that's all we do. We serve one another. Yeah. We serve one another as a father, as a son. A son serves a father. We serve the husband serves the family. And in these particular ways, we can begin to understand how to love, how to move.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Whatever you're gonna say, also, but I just wanted to add in that we're getting close to possibly number one. I might have to restart that recording if it runs into a time limit. Number two, is there anything beyond whatever you were just about to also say, but anything that you wish we had asked that we have not asked, or we're wanting to talk about, and if so, talk about that, and then also. If there's like one thing you could impress upon like everybody in the world, what would that be? Like some kind of concise, like couple sentences or less, like type like.
No, I hear you.
Keep it short.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I'd like to say is, as a result of raising family and what have you, when I came to get inaugurating, trying to get reestablished, some of my video stuff got kind of put to the side, and now it's funny, I'm now at this point, and like, wow, one thing with some of my godbrothers and sisters, we're working at creating and sharing some of the video that we have.
Yeah.
And we've started a new YouTube channel, Higher Consciousness Chronicles. It was for our organization is Higher Consciousness Enterprise, but that's our YouTube channel.
Higher Consciousness Chronicles?
Yes. and we were working at some projects on Gurudev about his life that they'll be coming shortly.
Awesome.
And once we're getting a little bit more closer with finalizing that, we'll let folks know.
Yeah.
But
man, I'm glad looking forward
you
to
know,
that.
but one of the things that I'd like to just leave is that, you know, we really have to use this opportunity in this life to go further, to understand more about who the self is, and we can do this through whatever sadhana, whatever practices we have, but to try to ask people to like just to work on themselves. Because the more we work on ourselves, the more we can be helpful to others.
Yeah.
And
Regardless
look
of whatever religion.
yeah,
whatever,
regardless, because you can
live
gotta
a good life.
live a
and
good,
treat
try
other
and work,
people.
but also adhere to your principles.
Yeah.
You know, if you're Christian, you know, adhere to those things. If Muslims, so on and so forth. But understand that ultimately there's only one God, and that we all are parts and parcels of God.
Yeah, we're all.
And it's all about love, regardless of
It's all
religion.
about
At the
love.
end
It's
of
all
the
about
day,
spiritual.
Yeah.
But do not neglect who you are and from your position,
Yeah.
because it's relevant. You know, and I mean just simply that. You know.
Ooh.
Very good.
Thank
Thank
you
you everyone
so
for
much.
listening. This has been The Sole Purpose with Ajamil. And don't forget to share, like, follow, subscribe, all the different things, whatever social media you're on. Send it to a friend or two. And thank you everyone for watching.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
Namaste.
Haribo.
Haribo.